afternoon and welcome to our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar. My name is Alex and today we'll be discussing tickle procedures in TWiST. If you're new to our webinar series, just a few notes on housekeeping. First, there is a zoom button. Our screenshot's a little out of date, but there's a zoom button in the title bar that can be used to adjust scaling. So if my screen shows too large or too small, you can use that to adjust it. There's also in the GoToWebinar control panel a Q&A area, so any questions you might have, just type them in there. If anything particularly pertinent pops up, I may pause to address it. Otherwise, we typically do a full Q&A session at the end. This is, as mentioned, part of our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar series. We try to do a webinar the third Wednesday of each month. Sometimes it gets pushed back like this month. Usually as soon as we know what we're going to be doing for the next month, we'll post details online at blanchardsystems.com/events. I've also been trying to post those on our Zendesk portal as well, so that you have links there before the webinars happen and recordings there after they happen.
And also on our YouTube channel.
Yep, they're also on our YouTube channel. So as far as today's agenda, we're going to be talking, as I mentioned, about tickle procedures in TWiST. So we're going to be going through the basics of how you create and call those procedures, the different ways that you can read in information and write out information, basic control flows such as conditionals and loops, and how you work around with processes in tickle procedures. We'll talk a little bit about how you would call third-party tools, and then we're going to show finally a few kind of showcase example procedures of some of the flashier things you can do with tickle in TWiST. As far as notes on scope, I'm assuming you have some basic background knowledge of TWiST. You're familiar with, I'm going to be talking a lot about setparam from REs and dealing with the TWiST table and variables. So I'm going to assume you have some basic knowledge there. I'm also going to assume that you have at least a basic familiarity with the terminology of programming, even if you haven't done much programming yourself. So for example, the idea of loops or conditional statements, methods and parameters. As far as the actual scope of the presentation, I was trying to figure out the best way to frame this. So I'm going to try and include a lot of the basics of writing those procedures so you have enough to get started if you haven't played with them before. Towards the end, I'm going to delve into some of the more complex things you can do with it. So I have a feeling I might bore some of the veterans here at the beginning and confuse some of the newbies towards the end, but hopefully on average, you'll wind up coming out of this with something. I will also say I'm not a professional programmer, so I'm sure there's better ways to code a few of the things I'm going to be showing, but as far as the basic to get you started, I hope this will help. So first off, what is tickle? And that is the official pronunciation that they use for that language. It stands for Tool Command Language. It was developed in the 90s. I think the early focus might have been on like scripting for like testing applications. The development focus for it is their main goals, at least according to their site, are to make it simple to learn and flexible to integrate. TWiST itself is partially written in tickle. So as far as TWiST goes, the interface is written in Java. The actual parts that manipulate images, like if you're doing like a PS check or some OPDF to normalize files, all the heavy duty for actual processing is done in C. But the workflow engine in TWiST, all the logic of the tools themselves is coded in tickle. And because of that, you have the ability to write your own tickle procedures from within TWiST and also call either tickle procedures that ship with the language itself or that Dalim developed themselves. And those procedures are basically ways of performing complex or repetitive tasks within TWiST. Particularly helpful for non-linear things. TWiST is very good if you have a set of tools, or even with setparam from RE, and you need to do things in a pretty standard order. You can set those up. If you have something where you need to kind of loop through a list of values or do something more complex, tickle procedures can help with that. So I'm not going to spend too much time with slides here. So I think as far as getting into the nuts and bolts of it, best way to get started would be to show you a few procedures. So let me get up TWiST here real quick. And as far as what a procedure is, I'm just going to make a new workflow. just to show an example of a very easy pre-baked one, let's just take the file name using our set param, and we'll make one call variables base name, because we've got maybe a PDF or something coming in. We want to capture what the name of the file is before the extension. Then what we could do is call, there is a TCL procedure that's built in called file root name. And the one here is just set param from RE standard. That's nothing to do with TCL. We're just taking the file name and inserting that as a variable here. But what this is going to do is it's going to, did that save? Hang on, this is
You hit
not my
cancel.
day.
Yeah, you
Oh,
hit
hit
cancel.
cancel. Yeah, sorry for the rough start here, guys. So variables, and now I can't type again. Okay, there we go. So far, so good this time. File root name. So the way this works is we have file as the TCL procedure we're running, and these two commands here, what we would call arguments. So this is telling it our parameters. So this is telling the file command that we want to grab the root name of this file, which is everything before the file extension. And the number one here, TWiST is going to substitute that automatically for the file name. So this isn't anything to do with TCL here. This part's TWiST. But the upshot of this is when I hit OK here and save, and I think I got a file on the desktop here I can drag in. Go to our process log here. And you'll see that when we went through our set param, that TCL procedure ran and it grabbed everything except the .pdf and the file name. There's a bunch of those that are built in that are quite useful. I'll show a list a little later. You could even nest these. So you could do, we have a file root name. We could also do a string to upper to make that uppercase. So I'll go ahead and do that. And this time, if I rerun this time, then we should get the file name, everything before the extension with the extension converted to uppercase. So you'll see that that did what we wanted it to. So that's one thing that these procedures can be used for, is to calculate values of some kind. One other thing procedures can be used for is to determine what branch files go down in a workflow. So maybe we've got, for example, a variables print plant is set to NYC. There is a procedure here that you could run check variable. Did I actually make that capital? Let's find out if I, nope, I didn't. So here we go. Print plant NYC. And we can actually stick a second one in here for, we'll say this is our LA branch, and this is our New York City branch. So we got another branch here for, I'll actually copy that link so I can be lazy. This is another one of those procedures that ships with TWiST that you might have used before but never really played with or really looked at as a procedure. So print plant is LA for that one. Let me make sure I don't have a leading space in here because I don't want that. This is basically going to, here we go. So let me clear these out of here. So you'll see that this time that file went to my New York City branch. And if I were to change this in here to say LA, then the next one I upload will go to LA. There we go. So those are two examples of what you can use these for. The first example was when we set the file name, we stripped off the extension and made it uppercase. That's one example of what you can use these for, is to change, manipulate data. Another example is what I showed here, where we can use them to control which branch a workflow goes down, like was the case with this check variable command. So those are two examples of some of the commands, the procedures that ship with TWiST. But what if we want to write our own? So I think to do that, what we'll do is, if we want to write our own procedures in here, let me get rid of all this fun. What we can do is right-click on the workflow canvas and go to Edit Procedures. And this will bring up the area where we can write our own procedures in here. So if we want to create a simple procedure, the general syntax is you have to type the word proc. You give the procedure a name of some kind, which is what you're going to use when you call it. So this is hello world. If you wanted the user to pass any parameters or any data to this procedure, you would put it between these brackets. For the simple one, we're not going to. Then to start the procedure, we put this curly brace up here. I'm going to tab in, and we're going to run wiffle MSG. Hello world. And then we're actually going to put, if we're doing this in a program link, we need to put a return code in here. If you use these for program links, it always looks back for either a 0 or a 1. If you put in a 0, then it won't follow that program link. If you put in a 1, then it will. So in this case, if we were using this within a set param, we might want to put in a different return so it actually returns some value, some calculation. If you're using this in a programmed link itself, though, you need to put in either a return 0 or usually return 1 in here. So let's go ahead and save that. And then if we wanted to call this in here, then what I could do is I'll actually just stick a node in here so I have something I can point it to. Then after this node, we can type in brackets, hello world. So this time if I take this file and upload, then if we look under this node where it ran, the logs for anything that happens in a program link get appended to the tool immediately before it. So we have the node here. If I had a PS check before it, then the logging from my program link would appear in the PS checks log at the very bottom. But we can see that that took our hello world and it gave us the value back. One thing that you have to be careful for when you're editing in here, by the way, this editor can be a little hokey sometimes. What I tend to like to do if I'm testing this is to open up, I'm stuck behind the GoToMeeting window here. You open up a new text window in, I like BB Edit. I usually tend to find it easier to edit in here. I can turn on like this, the syntax highlighting and everything for tickle, and then paste into here when I'm done. I tend to have a little more control in a local editor. But one thing you'll run into sometimes when you're editing in these, like let's say you make a mistake in here, you do something wrong. So I forget, for example, this closing brace. Let's say I do that, I go ahead and I save the workflow. Then what you'll see is when I save it, my workflow here stops running. And I get that little E icon next to it. So if it does that silently, you don't get a very overt error message when this saves. So if this will just kind of quietly turn to stopped. If you try and drag in a file or upload, you'll notice things aren't going. So then to figure out what went wrong or what happened here, you can click the eyeglasses and it'll show you there's an error here. This failed because it's missing a close brace at the end. So then once you edit that and you add in the close brace, you save the workflow. It doesn't automatically restart it, so you have to go in here and click the play icon again to get that running, even if you fixed whatever the error is. So just one thing to watch out for. We also did get a ticket recently. I think it might be fixed in a new build. I know we had someone reported there was an issue. I didn't deal with it too much. Jude might know more, but there was some issue when copying and pasting code in here. Sometimes the comments would get stripped out, these lines with the pounds before them. So I think there is a fix either in the latest betas or in the soonest upcoming betas for that, but I could be wrong. So we have our first basic procedure anyway. Let's say we want to do some more complex things. What are the other things we can do rather than just writing a message to the process log? One thing we could do is the return codes as mentioned. So let's change this up again. I'm going to do our two links in here. So we'll do, maybe we'll make this New York City and LA again. We could use our procedure and this time rather than having two separate checks, maybe we've got one where it says if just hello world. And we'll make this other one if no other link matches. Now in this case, hello world set to return 1, and that means true. So this link's going to run that procedure, and it's going to look for an output of either a 0 or 1 from this procedure. If we get the, let's see if, should probably clear up some of these old ones. So you see here we got our file came in and it went to NYC because that procedure returned 1, and that was valid for this link. If we change this so that it returns 0, then this time it's going to go down to that LA branch. So now as for why you would use this as opposed to setting variables in a set param and using like a check variable here, generally I would say this sort of routing I would only worry about if you have a very complex case that you can't handle with the stock tools like set param. This might be, for example, if you had a procedure that you're running and you're doing some kind of complex calculation to convert something from, for example, inches to millimeters, you want to make sure that that calculation worked correctly. So you could have it return 1 if the procedure ran correctly and you got a good conversion. And if there was an error, you return 0 and have it go down to some other node that does some sort of error handling. So that's usually where this makes sense to use. So that's one thing you can do with these. As far as another, it's kind of a bit of a laundry list here, but that's how you can return data. Let's say you wanted to return a value. You can also return a text value. So you could do a, let me get rid of these here again. Let's actually bring in a set param too. So this time let's do a, instead of wiffle message, hello world, which just printed that to the command line, let's do a return hello world. I'll actually drag in a set param here. And I think we need our show memories and validate. So there we go. So this time what we could do is add in here if file name matches anything, then set variables some value to hello world. Save that, we'll run our file again. And this time, if we look at our set param from RE, that returned the value hello world. So we were able to do some calculation in our procedure, and when we call that procedure in the set param from RE, then it set our variable to whatever that procedure returns. So if you're doing some kind of complex calculation, that's one way you could go about it. The next thing would be, how do we get information into one of these procedures so we can do some kind of crunching like that? That's where we bring in a parameter. So what we'll do is, maybe we'll make one in here, print message. Within these brackets here, we'll put the word message. And that's going to basically be a variable now that we can call from within this procedure. So what we'll do here is say wiffle message. And if we want to reference a variable like this, then we put a $sign in front of it. And then we can use that to reference whatever that value is. And we'll do a return 1 in here. Print message. Push our file in again. And we'll find out that I made a typo, so good troubleshooting test. So what is it unhappy with me at? Oh, of course, yeah, that's it. I didn't supply an argument, so I didn't put a message in. So we rerun this. Then this time we'll see that I got my message here. You can also set, if you've got maybe, like here, I forgot to put a message that time, maybe you've got some parameter like that that's totally optional, then what you can do is if you put that in a second set of curly braces, and just after that, you put in some default, then if I were to upload a file here, then just the way this is done now, I got my standard message because I have a argument in here. But if I delete that this time, instead of getting an error, then this time what'll happen is it'll pull that default in and it'll use that as its message instead. So that way I might have something optionally I want the user to supply, but not always, and I can set some sort of a default in here to handle that. So once you've got these things in too, you can also, if you want to create variables like this yourself, you can also do that with the set command. So I could have just set some value and then whatever I want to set that to. And then if I want to reference that at some point, then all I have to do is just use in a command somewhere is some value like that. So as far as other things we can do here, I know the basics are a little dry. It's a bit of a laundry list, but there's a few others I want to go through, and then we'll get to the fun examples. So I think next is if we wanted to actually do some kind of a calculation in here, what we could do is, I've got this procedure here. Let's do proc inches to millimeters. We'll make inches our parameter. We'll do Here we're actually going to cheat because Tickle is fairly extensible. It's designed to play well with a lot of other systems. And I've seen from the code of Dalim's, I've seen if you actually open some of the TWiST tools in a text editor and look at the Tickle, both we and they tend to use a lot of Linux commands rather than the native Tickle ones for certain things. I know math is one of the big ones because we've had some issues with, I think it was like rounding or something with the built-in one is called eval. But what we can do here is you can nest Tickle commands by putting them within braces within a command. So if I wanted to call my hello world from within another procedure, I can put it within braces and call it that way. But here what I'm going to do is I'm going to call exec, which allows me to run just a standard Linux command. And we're going to run echo, and then we're going to run bc, which is a math command. So bc likes its input echoed in. So we're going to do scale equals 2. I'll type this first and I'll explain what it means. Inches times 25.4 by bc minus L. I think I'm missing a...
You got a typo there too. It's 24.4 you put in.
Oh, yeah, 25.4. Good catch.
Yep.
So bc minus L. So I'll save that. And I'll move this back to I'll do our dance of inches. Will be 0.25 or something. I can't type again, but there we go. It keeps getting stuck for some reason, but let's see. So you can see here that we got back from our conversion, it did the calculation and multiplied that by 25.4. So that's one way you can do math. I think the last, actually there's one other thing you could do too is, one of the problems with that is the way that that one I just wrote is set up. You can only call that from within a set param from RE. Maybe there's a case where you wanted to actually run that in a program link. If you did now, it would get confused because it's expecting a code of either 0 or 1, either false or true, as the return, so it knows whether or not to follow the link. What we could actually do is build a wrapper around that. So you could do proc inches to link, and we'll take the same argument in. And this time what we'll do is we're going to use this command global. And what global allows us to do is retrieve the TWiST table. Global is we're working within a procedure here. As far as program scope goes, if I create a variable within the inches to millimeters procedure, I can only access that variable within the procedure, and then when the procedure finishes running, it's gone. It can't also see things that were variables that were created above it at a higher level of like the actual workflow. The global command allows you to specifically request access to one of those variables that was created at that higher scope. And the TWiST table is, if you've ever gone into show memories, everything that Dalim treats as variables gets put into this TWiST table, which is basically a two-dimensional array. Everything in the TWiST table is arranged into categories. So we've got like the original files category here. We've got a variables category, a WIFL category. If you use file check a lot, that tends to put things into the document category. And then we've got a variable name within that category, and then that variable has a value. So we've got our TWiST table. And if we wanted to access anything in that TWiST table, we could do the standard $sign TWiST table. Actually, I'm going to do it outside the TWiST table. And I could do like original file, comma name, and that would be how I would access something in the TWiST table. In this case, I don't want to access, I want to actually write something to the TWiST table. Maybe we want to do this conversion in a link and we wanted to write it to a known piece of metadata rather than just return the value, because that way we don't have to set up an extra set param from RE. Then what I can do here is we'll do set TWiST table. We're going to set, we'll make a category inches to mm, and we'll make one called original. And for original, we'll put inches. We'll just save whatever the original result of the calculation, or what the original input to the calculation was, so we have it if we need it later on. And we'll do set TWiST table inches to mm output, and we'll set this to inches to. So what this is going to do is, and I'll set this to return 1. And I'll actually explain this while it's running so we don't waste more time while I'm, so here we go. Is that going to do its thing? There we go, dramatic tension. Push in a, well, I guess it doesn't matter what file I push in here. So we'll just grab that one. So what this is doing is, oh, it would help if I actually added in the procedure, wouldn't it? So what we'll do here is, I'm just gonna bypass this. I'm going to do a, it helps if I actually call the procedure after I write it, turns out. So inches to mm link, and we'll set that to, maybe we'll do, I'll just make up a number.
I mentioned to toss a dollar sign in front of the TWiST table when you set it as a value.
Wait, what did I do wrong?
So you didn't put a dollar sign in front of the TWiST table when you set it as a value?
I don't think you need to put it there when you're pulling it in, but we'll see in a minute if it blows up, then I'll go back. Because it's, when you set a variable, you don't need to put a value in like that. So if you do set myvar to some value, then you don't need it, but then if you're referencing it, you need
I
to.
misread that. He said toss it, yeah. He was actually telling me to get rid of it, not to add it.
Gotcha, let's see here. So I think that's good. Find out if I did anything horribly wrong in a moment, but
Yeah, set TWiST table, not set dollar sign TWiST table.
oh yeah, you're right. Good catch. Yeah, rookie mistake there. Yeah, there we
Thanks,
go.
Ryan.
Yep, thanks, Ryan. So let's see here. We'll do a new one. So you'll see this time our procedure ran in the link and it wrote out 2 values to our TWiST table. And since I forgot to mention earlier, I just glossed over it. How this conversion was actually working is we're calling a Linux command called BC. BC likes you to pipe input into it as text. The scale 2 means you want to round to 2 decimal places maximum. And this here is just the normal calculation. We're calling the variable $inches. And standard syntax, we're using the asterisk for multiply by 25.4. And then we're just piping that to the BC command with the -L argument. So, but that's a way of, if you have this procedure that you want to call in 2 different places, if you have a procedure that returns a value, it generally, other than 1 or 0, it generally won't work in a link like this. And you need to call it in a command merge or a set param or something like that. but that doesn't prevent you from making a wrapper around it that allows you to use the same core logic and then call that same core logic from two different places. This way, if I ever change the way I do this conversion or I make my procedure do something else, I don't have to change the second one here. I don't have two separate copies of it to worry about. I have one primary copy and then a wrapper around it. So I know we're going long here. There's two more quick basic things I want to go over, and then after that we'll dive into the fun examples. I got about 3 or 4 of those for anyone who wants to see them. So as far as other basic examples, one thing I'll mention, actually, it might be a good time to switch over to that, would be if you want to test this, it can get very cumbersome like you see here, going in and editing in here and making tweaks. One thing you can do is if you have a Mac, I'm sure there's a Windows version of it too. I know there is a Linux one. There is a program called TCL shell, Tickle Shell, that you can use to run Tickle on your Mac. And when you're doing it that way, you can basically write whatever you want direct in here. I had to put one wrapper around. It likes to use the command puts for print as standard Tickle. Dalim's Wiffle message is their own custom thing. So I just put a wrapper method I made here around that basically just pipes everything to puts. So you can actually test the code as it would run in TWiST. So you can test there very quickly. So I think our last two things here would be, before we get to the fun examples, would be conditionals and loops. So conditional would be, let's say you have a situation. I'm not going to try typing this out. I'm just going to copy and paste for speed reasons. So we've got a situation where we've got 3 different plants here. And this procedure is going to tell us which plant is which. So if I were to run it, for example, and say that my plant is New York, it knows which that is. If I say LA, then it knows what that is. And if I make up something by just mashing keys, it doesn't know what it is. So how this works is we have a conditional statement here. We have an if, which is the first thing we check, is the plant equal to New York? If that isn't the case, we have a second one here, an else if. So if the plant isn't New York, then is it LA? And if it's not LA, we don't know what it is. We have a final catch-all for anything else. And within each of these 3 conditions that we can have, we can run different commands to do something or another. So this one here runs, outputs New York and returns the OK code. This one outputs Los Angeles and does the OK code. And this third one down here, if it doesn't know what it is, it copies the variable from the input, uses some slightly different text, and returns 0, which in this case would be false. If we saw that in TWiST, we might know something went wrong with this procedure, and we can do some kind of error handling of our own. So that's how you can switch between, if you have different cases where you need to do different things depending on what a value is, this is how you can handle that. The next thing would be looping if you have something you need to run through. For example, if I think if I put a file check in here real quick, let me get rid of that. So file check is up here. So if we stick a file check in here, and we want to grab a bunch of information about whatever PDF we upload. So let's go here and push in. I think I had one with a lot of spot colors in it. Let's try this one. Yeah, so for example, here you can see we have in our TWiST table, when this runs for file check and it analyzes the PDF I uploaded, you can see this PDF has 6 different channels in it. It has the standard 4 process colors, and we've also got 2 spot colors in here. Let's say we had a case where we needed to do something with that data. How would we loop through this? Then what we could do is we could use, there's a few different types of loops we can use to analyze this. So let's make the first would be for something like this, we could do, let's see here, we'll do var colors equals, or actually be a set colors. I'm thinking of JavaScript too much ES recently. Set colors. If we use the list command, we can imitate this list here. So what we could do is, actually let's use, I got an example here we can edit that might be a little quicker. So we can do make our list here the same way. We do the cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. The list command will take all these things as arguments and make everything that has a space between it a different item. If we wanted to do like something that had spaces in it, you put quotes around it to keep it separate. So what this will do is loop over our list. So if I do you'll see that each loop it prints out, it goes through this for each here. It splits everything in this into a separate item here, the for each. So it says go through everything in this list, go through it one time in this loop. So it's going to loop through every bit of code in here, once for cyan, then once for yellow, once for so on. And on each of those loops, whichever item in the list it's currently on, it will handle that with the item. You can refer to that as the item variable for that iteration of the loop. So that's how you would go through and reference those. So one other thing you could do too is you might have a case where you want to deal with numbers. One thing you could do with that is we call a for loop here. We could have this loop here where we're setting a variable equal to 0, and the for loop will say, create this variable, we'll set it to 0. While it's less than 10, then loop through it, and each time add 1 to it. That's what this increment here means. And so it'll loop through and we get 0 through 9 that way. You can also do that. There's also a method for that called a while loop. So we could set a variable called count, and we could make count equal to 0. Then we do a while loop, and what this loop would do is as long as that count is less than 10, it's going to keep rerunning this code. This particular code here is going to increment the count that way. So it's going to do basically the same thing here. One case where you might want to use the while loop instead of the for would be if you had a case where you weren't dealing strictly with numbers. You're doing some operation and you want to keep running it over and over until something happens. So for example, you might want to keep looping until a file exists or something. You could set that while condition to be rather than a greater than or less than here. You could do like what we did in here with the equal sign for, actually I don't think we had that in there. You could do something with the equal sign like we had here when we were comparing plant names. So you could wait until a variable gets set somewhere in that loop and then go off that base, then off a count. So that's the basics of this. I'm going to look over the questions for this part before we get onto the fun stuff. If you have any questions about basic syntax, feel free to ask them now.
All
So
right,
first question.
you gonna go ahead, or you want me to ask them for you?
Yeah, sure, if you want to ask them for me, actually, that's fine.
All right. So what syntax or version of TCL should we use when writing procs?
TWiST comes with, at least as far as TWiST 9, comes with support for 2 different versions of TCL, 8.5 and 7.3. I think 8.5 is the default now for newer workflows. So I generally would say stick with that if it's working. Typically, we wind up toggling if there are differences. I think TCL 7.3 is about 10, 15 years old at this point. Some of the newer regular expressions, for example, don't work as well in 7.3. So if you have an error with something weird happening in the workflow, sometimes you can try toggling those. But I don't know of anything to recommend one over the other than 8.5 is one newer.
In hand with that, how helpful are books like TCL for Dummies or something like that towards this?
Well, I haven't look too much at those books to say how relevant they would be. I'm sure that if there's a book out there like that, TCL is pretty standard. So if you wanted to use a book like that, it should work fine with TWiST. There are some commands in TWiST that are custom, but most of the stock stuff should work. They also have online, if on the TCL site, I think they have manual for the specific version. So usually if you go in here, there's this command section. This shows you every major TCL command, and if you want to look through and see what your options are for that. So for example, the file command is one we use a lot. Where is L?
All right.
Here we go. So that shows you all the different options, and there's some pretty detailed documentation here on what all these things do.
Great. All right. What's the best way to move procedures from one workflow to another? Or I guess to have some as default, I would say would be the thing.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a really great answer here other than just copying and
Yeah, if you
pasting.
put it, no, isn't there a file? There's home symlinks Dalim 60 IO wiffle IO procedures.tickle. I think if you put them in
Oh,
that file, they show up in every workflow, if I'm not mistaken.
well, I learned something new today, so it's
Somebody
pretty cool.
correct me if I'm wrong there. And we can send that note out to everybody. Jude, your mic working? Is that correct? What I said?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
So I'd say go with that then.
All right, and then how would you pass the metadata value from ES to eTwist to drive the workflow? For example, if the ES workflow knew which plan it was going to print at.
So how you would do that is if you were calling this is eTwist specifically, what I'll do here is, I don't know if I might have an eTwist workflow in here I can show it with. Generally what you would do is, actually I can show, I have an example in here I can show. It looks a little different for, eTwist, but it's the same general principle. So if I go into, do I have?
That's too well documented of a workflow there.
This is one I use for training, so everything is documented out the wazoo. This might have been the one. Yeah, it looks a little different in eTwist because in eTwist, what you have to do is you have to go into your workflow, and if you do a right click in here, if I'm not losing the window somewhere behind all this other stuff, I don't want to, I'm doing procedures.
Yeah, you keep
So
going.
I'm conditioned to look at that today. That's all I've been doing this morning. So if you were doing this for eTwist, you define your variables in here like print location. And then these would automatically show up when you save the workflow. Those PPD variables will automatically show up in ES, and you can just set your options from. For regular Twist with ES Connect, it's the same kind of idea, but you have to manually define them here. In eTwist, these would automatically show up, and you'd only have the option to set a value here. When you have that option, you can choose between just like typing in a value, or you just enter something hard-coded. You can also pull it from, for example, metadata if you want to grab something from a specific metadata set and from like the file or the job or something. Or you can do just standard edit variables. Here, yeah, for example, I did a metadata set. I had a value for this workflow, whether or not I wanted it to output in TWiST an X1A or an X4 file. So that workflow did that based on, I actually have that workflow here. Where is, yeah, so all that workflow did was when that parameter came in, I had a piece of metadata that was set in my project job ticket that was just an enumeration dropdown for either X1A or X4. When I set that up to send over via metadata here, then TWiST pulls that in. It comes in the web link category, and then I can access it with getmem web link PDF format. And that was my variable name. That's the category. And then once I do that, then I just used a set param here to overload the PDF version in my OPDF tool here.
Great.
So
I think
that's
that
how you can
answers it.
drive.
Just let us know if that didn't answer your question, but I think that covers it pretty well.
Yep, and as far as, and I know we're going over, I'm going to show real quick there, I didn't have time to make a nice slide for it. I have a list of all the procedures you might want to look at as a starting point. I'll show those real quick. We are going over, but I'm going to still continue with the fancy examples we have if you're still free. We'll go
So
through all the
you're
in-depth
still
ones.
short compared to your other webinars you've done this year.
That was 2 Spinal Tap. The last one I went for way too long. It was a train wreck, but so as an example, I don't think we'll be quite that long today. I'm going to try and finish up those other examples in about 15, 20 minutes. So as far as if you're trying to get a handle on this, there are things you want to look at as where do I get started? What procedures and what commands should I start to look at first? I broke this down into built-in ones that come with TCL by default, useful third-party tools you can call, Dalim procedures, and Dalim variables. So for basic variables, you've got, for TCL ones that are built in, commands that deal with variables, there's set, which allows you to set variables global. You've got a few for dealing with strings, such as the file command, which allows you to extract extensions or root names. There's a few different commands here that deal with regular expressions. You'll see in the examples I have up, coming up. A few things here for list manipulation. There's a few for loops, where these are the different commands you use to control loops. Procedure status, returning errors, return statuses. Didn't have time to do today, but catches, where if something goes wrong during the procedure, you can try and catch specific errors and you know that the error happened and you can mitigate it directly in your procedure. As far as useful third-party tools for I/O, we tend to use a lot of the standard TWiST stuff like Echo, our standard bash stuff like Echo, cat, curl. For math, BC is the way to go. If you want to do file manipulation, XFtool is really handy if you want to read or scrub metadata in any complex way. Sometimes if there's any sort of image manipulation you want to do that TWiST can't handle for whatever reason, Image Magic can be a useful tool. And if you need to do anything with JSON or XML, JQ for JSON, XMLint if you're reading XML, and XML Starlet if you want to actually write your own custom XML are interesting ways to go. As far as some of Dalim's built-in procedures, if you're calling these in a link, generally you need to put brackets around them, but there's the standard getMem, which allows you to retrieve a TWiST table value based on a category it's in and the variable name. A check variable, which lets you control which branch a workflow goes, whether or not a workflow follows a link based on a variable matching some value. Wiffle message and wiffle send message, which are just 2 different ways of sending a message to the process log. There's 2 commands here. If you're running these in like a set param or something, you need to put brackets around them, but this will give you the workflow hot folder that a file was dropped into if it was dropped into a custom hot folder. And if you have dynamic hot folders enabled where within your hot folder, you're dumping into a folder named after like the job ID, this will get you the dynamic hot folder ID. There's also the 3 here I won't dig into now, but if you're using ESConnect and you want to tell ESConnect to ignore a certain file, ES to ignore a certain file and not send it back, then you can use the set ignore file or set high res to force a specific path as the high res in ES. As far as variables, you've got the standard TWiST table we were talking about. There is the name variable, which gives you the current name of the file. Working dir, which gives you the current working dir of the file. Failure, which actually gives you the state of the workflow, whether or not it's failed. Ryan had a cool example of letting you fail a workflow or not, depending on whether, or basically if a workflow failed, you could change that status to unfail it. Wiffle process gives you the process ID for that particular file, and this one down here, I think there was some way you could get other processing information about the TWiST process itself, but I don't want to dive into those too much today, so we'll get to the fun stuff now, I think. So as far as examples, I think we'll start with a fun one. So if any of you know Jude has an affinity for some interesting fonts. So I made maybe we're running some kind of a print thing, and we want to make sure that when someone went out to lunch, Jude didn't sneak in and design the whole magazine in Comic Sans or Papyrus or something. I wrote a did Jude design it procedure. And if I drop a file in here, I basically built my own custom error message that will fail the file in TWiST and give a custom error message in the process log. So we'll take, I think my thing's still busted here, so I will find that file in here. Here we go. So, and we'll actually upload for reference, we'll upload another normal file that doesn't have anything too crazy in it. I'll delete these two examples. So this file came in, and if you haven't seen my test file, that is a very Jude-like file. So our workflow caught it, and if we click on the process link, we'll see it failed in the Did Jude Design It node. And if we look at our link, we get an error in here that says the error was Jude-like graphic design detected, and it failed the file because of that. So how that worked was I had a file check in here, and actually our other file came through fine because that didn't have any Comic Sans in it. So how this worked is I had a procedure in here. We have a file check that grabs a whole bunch of information. Among the information it grabs, I didn't put a set param in here, that would have been too easy, but there is a variable in there, document embedded fonts, that has a list of all the fonts in the document. So our procedure does the global to access the TWiST table. It runs a regular expression check on that embedded fonts variable to see if it contains either the word comic or papyrus. If it sees papyrus, it uses the error command to throw a specific custom error message. If it doesn't see that, then it returns 1, which tells the workflow to continue on as normal. So that's a simple example. As far as slightly more complex examples here, create error log was, I think that's the next one I'll show. So this one was basically, we have a case where I'm actually going to dump in a whole bunch of files to this. I'm just going to go to desktop, webinar, and I think I got a good representation of files here. This workflow is set up so that a bunch of these files should all fail at different points in this workflow. And we might want some kind of historical logging on that later to see what went wrong with these files. So these should all fail. One of them might end up taking a minute. But what this workflow is going to do is whenever a file fails, it's going to write a log line into a CSV log. So like basically a spreadsheet log that will show me every file I had that failed that day. Of course, these files are probably going to take a minute. So there we go. That one failed in, I forget where. We should see here in a minute. I'm going to double check to make sure my mount is good here. I made a mistake in my workflow. Let's see. Let me actually make that directory real quick. I think that's what my mistake is. It's not good when the workflow that's supposed to error actually errors in a way I didn't want it to. So let's see if let's try that one more time.
That's a good way to show people troubleshooting in real time.
Yeah. Well, my problem is I get really like bothered if I have all these random test files. They're cluttering up my screen. So I forgot I expressly made that folder and I cleaned it up because it was getting in my way.
No.
So hopefully this time this should work. While that's running, I can actually show you the procedure too. Hopefully one of these things will fail soon. And with any luck, we should see Yeah, they take a long time because one of these I had to put like a file with like 1 million vector objects in it just to get it to fail in trap. Yep, there we go. This time it's working. So I'll open it now. We'll open it again, and I'll show how the procedure works. We can open it again in a minute when the other one finally fails in trap. So validate these. So you can see we have a spreadsheet here. It shows me the date. It shows me I actually didn't finish putting in. If I had an order number variable in here, you could log like an order number. It shows me the file that failed, and it shows me that it failed during pre-flight. And a few more of these should fail at decoration or trapping later on. Actually, if those, yeah, if I reopen that now, we should see a few more in there. And the trapping one takes a few minutes to fail. But you can see we've got our nice log. So if you want to know exactly what failed on a given day, you've got a pretty good run through here of what happened. So here's how this works. When files come through, I built a really simple procedure in here because I was actually surprised it didn't exist. We needed to, oh, goodness, here we go. For it to save version, yes. So what I wanted to do was in between every step, we needed some way of setting a variable to say what the current step was called. And I guess I got kind of used to ES where we use a program links in ES and JavaScript to use it to set metadata. So I made my own simple procedure in here called set variable because I didn't want to have to put a set param from RE in between every single tool in this workflow. So I made a simple one and done set variable procedure here that it takes in a category name, a variable name, and a value. Pulls in the TWiST table, then it just sets the variable that I wanted to the value I wanted. This is just meant to be very function agnostic, but just a nice, easy way of setting that value. But the real meat of it is, so in between each step, I'm setting what it's doing, whether it's trapping, decoration, PDF output, whatever that is, I'm just setting in the program link. But if something should error in the workflow for whatever reason, then what I did is I put in this error branch here. And in my error branch, I call a procedure called log rejected file. And that is a second procedure I have down here. So what this does is it doesn't take any arguments in because I have it just hard coded. It's very specific to this workflow. I know where I'm writing the step in. So it doesn't take in any inputs. But what it does is it makes global the TWiST table. It also pulls in that name variable, which tells you the current file name. First off, I use the Linux date command with exec date to set the date name that I'm going to need for my file name, and also for the, which is just the date, and then a date time for my log. From there, I set 2 paths for my logging. If you wanted to make this more reusable, you could probably do that in a set param too, or maybe pass in the log path as an argument. I wanted to keep this simple though. So I'm just hard coding in here a log path and a log name that is based on the date. From there, I have my CSV headers. If for these CSV spreadsheets, they're really just a, let me hit open. Those are really just comma separated values if you've never played with them. So Excel is able to interpret them like a spreadsheet, but they're basically, you've got commas around each of these, or quotes around everything in here, and then commas between each of the fields. And whenever it sees a comma, it knows it's a new column. And then whenever it sees a new line return, it knows it's a new row. So in order to write that in TWiST, what I did was just, first off, I had to put the, set up what the column headers were going to be here. We have the backslashes to escape the quotes so that we could write that. When we go to do this, then we check to see if there is a log file because we need to put these headers at the very beginning. So if someone opens this in Excel, they see those headers. But conversely, we don't want those headers to get put into the log file every single time this runs. Otherwise, we'd have headers, log line, headers, log line. So this checks to see if the file exists with the file exists command and then the path to our file. If the file exists, then it doesn't stick the headers in. If the log file is new, then it uses an exec echo to echo those header variables we set to the log file that's creating. Then regardless of whether or not it adds those headers with that conditional, then it writes in my log data in that same CSV format. So pretty bare bones. It's the same thing where I know what the exact fields are and I'm calling a variable for each of them and manually putting in the quotes and quotes around and the commas between them. So that's how that works. For our next fun example, it actually comes from our newest tech is Ryan Fromm, and he had a really cool example here that I like, so I'm going to show it and gleefully steal it. So our next example is this remove same family. And I don't know how in the weeds I'm going to be able to explain, but I get the general gist of it, and it's really cool. So you have cases sometimes where you are running files through a workflow, and maybe you're branching and you're doing different things in different branches, but you need all those things to happen before the workflow finishes. Let's say there's a case where, in this case, we're actually forcing a failure in here. So there's nothing that's ever going to match in this set prime from RE, so this branch is going to fail. Actually, let me, there we go, I'll delete all my old stuff to clean this up. So you can see this file forked into 3 branches. 2 of them succeeded because they're just going to validates. This third one up here went to this forced failure branch, which then failed because it couldn't match anything in that set param. In a case like this where we're forking the workflow and one branch fails, we might not want these others to continue on in the workflow because they're waiting for something essential that's never going to come. And they're going to go on in the workflow and maybe do harm, or maybe they're going to get stuck in a validate or eat up hard workers or something. What would be nice is if there was a way we could automatically clean those up. And Ryan built a way to do that. So I'm actually going to stick in this fancy link here, and we're going to rerun the same test. Delete these entries out of here. So what we're going to do here is there's just a special thing in here, remove same family. So what happens this time is if I upload that same file again, then this time we're going to see that it's going to come in, it's going to fork into 3 processes. One of those processes is going to fail, and then it's going to delete the other processes that were still running and remove them from TWiST so that they can't do any harm or hog the system. And we just got that one that went to the error node and would have sent a mail if I had it sent up. So how does this work? What this procedure does is this remove same family is there's actually a cheat in the front because you need a way to know that the files are from the same branch. Can I resize this window or?
I love watching other people have the same problems I always have.
Okay, we'll keep it small. Actually, I can paste it into a text editor if need be too.
That might be better.
That might be better. The first thing in here, there's a cheat where he's setting we need a way to know that these files are related. And what he's doing is actually, when the files come in, TWiST automatically makes a variable called original file mtime in seconds. So it gives you the millisecond timestamp of when that file was uploaded. So when this file first comes in, before the workflow forks, it sets that to it actually sets the user for the file to that upload timestamp so that that's unique and we can key off that later. So I'm going to copy this into another editor so I can play with it here. So what this workflow then does is there is the WebLink API. Let me actually break that workflow again and I can show you what it's doing under the hood. So let's get rid of this branch here. Let's upload a file again so it fails. So I'll push this back in. If you've never played with the WebLink API, it's calling a URL in here for the TWiST API. And it's sticking in a few sneaky variables too, but So this is the TWiST API. If we run this command, we can see all the processes that are on our TWiST server. And we can see file name and everything, whether they're failed or running or whatnot. Through the API, you can also delete files, upload files, that sort of thing. What he's doing in this procedure is he queries for every file that's running on the current server that this failed file was running on. And he's searching for, the target is the username of the current file. So you can see in here, it shows the user, so we can see that. So if he gets the whole list of files that are running on the server, he looks for only ones with the same user as this current file, which is really the unique identifier here, or the timestamp of when it was uploaded. He then turns that into a TCL list and cleans it up a little and basically looks for the area here where it gives you the file name. And then he pulls that file name and he trims it up a little with a few other commands in here, and then runs another curl that calls the WebLink API and uses it to delete. It loops, I think actually it loops through the whole list of files that it found and uses the WebLink API to delete those processes. So,
Yeah, please don't use this to prank any other users in your departments.
but that's how that works. So we got one last flashy example here too. So this is actually no, I got two more examples. There's one of them is actually kind of cool. So did I put it in here? Yeah. So one thing we run into a lot is, or we got a ticket on this about a year ago. This was an example I built for a ticket, was if you've used ES, you know, you have the ability to send grouped mail. So if someone gets a notification for files that are waiting for their approval, they can get grouped mails at every 5 minutes, rather than sending them 50 emails for 50 different files that came in waiting for their approval. You could send them one email every 30 minutes, and that one email might list those 50 files, so they get fewer emails. We had a case where we had a customer asking for a way to send grouped emails in TWiST, where they wanted to get emails that had a bunch of files attached, and they didn't want those files zipped. The standard way you would handle this in TWiST would be to use a filter group to match up a bunch of files. You would use the compress tool to zip those together, and then you could send a zip file via sendmail. But that customer didn't want to do it because I think it was something with they wanted to delete certain files before forwarding them on, or it might have been like, I know a lot of email providers for workplaces will filter zip files because they could contain malware. So this, just to show you a run of this, and then we can explain it afterwards. What I will do is upload a batch of files here. And I think we should be done by 3:30 Eastern. So sorry for going over again, but I think these are cool examples, and I don't think it's quite as Spinal Tappy as last time was. So we'll push all our files in here. We're going to go over to our trusty ES server where I actually have Thunderbird running on here. I'm just sending locally, but these files should come in. It'll take about 30 seconds for them to run through the process. And in about 30 seconds, we should get 2 emails based on customer code, and each of those emails will contain 2 or 3 files grouped together as attachments. So while that's cooking, I think I'll show you how it works so we don't waste 30 seconds. So the first part of this is we're setting a, I think we're getting our mail right now, so better than expected. So see, we got 2 emails here for files are ready. If I look at this first one, files are ready for the customer demo, and I got 3 separate attachments here. I also got this files are ready for customer ATRK, and I got our 2 ATRK files attached here. So as far as how that would work, first off, we have a set param from RE in here. And what this is doing is I'm setting my recipient list here, first off, just to my user, just to make it easy to change later so I don't hard code it in the procedure. I'm setting my customer code based on the files I uploaded all had the Just to make things easy, the customer code is the first atom here in the file name. So I'm using the regular expression here to extract that customer code. I'm putting my mail subject in here and my mail body in here. There are ways you can actually set this mail body in a text file somewhere else, so it's like pre-coded if you do a longer email, but just to keep it simple. So that's what I've set up there. Next, I have a filter group tool here. And what this filter group is going to do is it's going to weight and group files together based on this condition here. I'm grouping based on two things, the mail recipient list and the customer code. So it's going to, in this case, my recipient list is the same, but you might have cases where you have different jobs, get different people notified. This is what my unique grouping criteria is. So based on what we set in that set param, it's going to look and create groups in this filter group tool based on these two values. So anything that has the customer code ATRK and has root at localhost as the recipient list is going to get grouped together in this process. This is going to, filter group's going to wait for 30 seconds here just to keep it short. After 30 seconds, it's going to time out waiting. And I've set the wait for an absurdly high number of files so that that's just going to wait for a second everything that comes in. After 30 seconds, it's going to group those files together in one process and then continue. So after that 30 seconds is up, you have two processes, each with I'm going to open this up before I lose them, but you're going to have two processes. One of them has two files associated with it. One of them has three files associated with it based on that customer code and the recipient list that we want to email it to. From there, I'm calling the send group mail procedure here, and I'm passing in all my procedures. And again, with the question I don't think I answered earlier was, it's why would you want to keep these? We already have these set in set param. Why would I enter these in here manually? And one of the reasons I did that is I wanted to separate the implementation of the procedure from the workflow. So if we have a different workflow later on where we want to use this procedure and we want to set maybe a different recipient list or a different mail body or do something a little differently, we're not hard-coded to looking for specific variables. We can change how that's set up in set param later, or use completely different variables that come in from WebLink or something. The implementation of the procedure is separate from the workflow this way. It's its own little encapsulated little bubble, but we're passing in all those values. Now what this procedure is going to do is it's going to use, there's a third-party mail tool called Mutt that you can install in Linux to send the mail. If you wanted to actually send to a proper mail rather than to just like localhost like I am here, then if you go to home TWiST ADM, because this is going to end up getting run, any external commands you run in TCL procedures from TWiST get run as a TWiST ADM user. And I have a mutt RC configuration file, and you can set like an actual SMTP URL in there and email address that it's sending from and other details like that if you need to authenticate to a proper server. I have these in here now, they're just commented out for the moment, but that's how you would do that. But and I'm pulling in the working dir TWiST table as basic entries. I actually think I was looking at Ryan's procedure earlier. I think you can simplify. If you're doing a global, I don't think you need to put them on two lines like I was. I think you can actually just do one line and put the things up there separately so that you'd have both of them that way. I think that's the proper way, but I didn't realize that. So I tend to like to put a lot of debugging in these procedures too, so you can watch what happens in the logs. But so there's a lot of debugging and comments in here, but basically what I'm doing is I'm looping through the list of files that we have in our process. Actually, at first I'm compiling the base command. So I'm writing into a variable the name of the command I want to run. In this case, my mail command is echo mail body to mutt, and then set mutt to use the subject line. The next part is I have that base command that sets the mail body and the mail subject. I need to do the attachments. Mutt likes the attachments at the end. I'll actually show you the command in the logs after this. It likes a dash and then double dash, and then the attachments all have to follow that. So what I did then is I loop through the list of files that are in my working dir, and I one by one append those to the end of this mail command so that it keeps adding those to the command. And once each of those recipients is added to the command, or once each of those Yeah, after that, then I put in the recipient list after I do all those attachments. And then from there, I just use bash to call the command that I spent this procedure compiling and save the output just in case I want it for later. I like doing that because, and you don't always have to put these procedures after a node, but I like to because it's kind of like making your own tool. So for example, here I have my send mail, and I can see all the stuff it did. So here's my recipient list, here's my file list it was going to loop through, just all the debug information. I can see status, so if it fails on like a typo or something on one of these, uh, before I get the error message, I'll see at what point in the process it was at. And there's the actual finished command that it was running. So you can see it gives the message body because mut likes that piped in. I have mut -s, the email subject line, and then there's all the attachments one by one that are loop generated. At the very end, our recipient list after the double dash. So that's how that works. Now the final showcase, and then we'll get this wrapped up, is this is something we use in live production for a customer whose ES we run for them. If you've ever used ES file systems, should make this a little smaller here. I didn't get to hook this one up as much as I wanted, but so with ES file systems, you can upload either via the ES interface or you can upload them direct to the file system itself, and ES will watch that folder and pull them in if you have people uploading outside of ES. But if we push in a file here, we'll see it show up on our file system. If we upload a new revision, then you'll get a suffix here, the underscore R1, that tells us that it's a revision file. So you'll see we've got two revisions in ES, and we've got the revision suffix on this one. So that's what ES does if you upload through the interface. If you're actually dealing with a file system, like if you had this shared out and users were working in InDesign or whatever and exporting directly to the file system, and they save back to the original name, that wouldn't create a new revision. It would overwrite the existing revision of the file in ES, which can be a problem. So we had a case, the customer we built this for, where they get files and they normalize them through TWiST before they go to ES. They're basically picking up from an FTP and running the files. And they wanted a way to, without the files ever hitting ES first, they wanted a way in TWiST to normalize them and then transmit them to the file system with the right suffix so that they would create a new revision. Because yeah, you'll see here, for example, I manually copy this and paste this with, might actually been too slow there. That should create a third revision if I wasn't too slow. But they basically wanted a automated way of doing this. So what I did was I created a, and I don't have it hooked up to my file system here because I ran out of time, but I built a send to ESFS workflow here. In this workflow, I will dump in a file here. Let's get something a little more boring. So let's choose this one. And I'm actually gonna make a variant of this we can play with in a minute. So this file should come in, should run through our workflow, and it'll transmit to our file system here. If I re-upload the same file again, then what it's gonna do this time is copy, we'll get our R1, and if I did it a third time, I get a, actually it's good actually to show that. Let me copy on the R2 here this time, manually. And this time if I upload another file, then this time, since I manually copied this R2 in, the next one that comes in from ES is going to be R3. So it's going to make sure those don't overwrite, and we have the file set up so that the ES file system will create the correct revisions and users don't accidentally end up overwriting an old revision. So that's how that works. And I actually made this tricky enough that if maybe someone's sneaky and they try and directly upload one named R2, it's going to catch that as well. And so this one will come in as R4, even though the original file was uploaded with _R2 in the name. So that's one way of keeping these separate. This version's a little dumbed down so that it would be quick enough to show in here. The one thing this doesn't count for is if I delete R1, for example, this is going to, the next file that came in would be seen as R1. In this case, I don't think that matters because ES doesn't really care what the actual number is as long as it's unique and not tied to a previous revision. I'm not sure if that's intentional or a bug, but that's the way it seems to work right now. So I didn't worry about that here. In the production one, we kind of cheat and look elsewhere to calculate the revision and then just use this as a double check. But so what this is going to do is we're taking in two parameters. Actually, I should probably show the workflow itself first. I can call this two different ways in the workflow too, but I am setting, I don't need some of that anymore. I'm setting an output path where the file is going to be the file system, the file is going to be delivered to, because we need to know that path in order to check it. We don't need that. We don't need the base name extension stuff anymore. I got rid of that. And then we're just calling that get ES suffix with the output path. And then that's going to generate two variables that we can actually, as part of its process, that we can then just stick in transmit and know we have a vetted thing that we can use to deliver. So we have that, put a revision check name with revision and revision check output path that we know are good and are not guaranteed to not overwrite anything. So the way this works is, and at least for now, the path is just the same one you put in, but I'm storing it there just in case the procedure ever changed, or there's a variant I'll show in a bit where you call it from a program link where you might want to stash that because you don't already have that set as a variable in the first place. So what this is doing is this procedure takes in the output path. It optionally takes in a default file name if you could specify, like if you're going to rename the file as part of the process, rather than giving it the current file name, you could give it like the ideal file name and have it do the rename as part of this check. But if you don't specify a custom file name as an argument, it's going to use the default name. First off, I ran into an issue with this because you can't call a variable here, because I was really trying to do like get mem variables original file name, but you can't do that. So what I had to do here is I set that to a very obvious thing like default file name. Then what I did down here is I check first off if that file name is set to default file name, then I'm pulling from that global file name variable, which gives you the current file name and makes that the one that you're going to check. From there, I break apart the file name into the base name and the extension with the file root and file extension TCL commands here. From there, what I have to do is I check if someone's cheating and they're uploading a file like this that had the R2 at the end. I use the regular expression command to check and pull out that number. And I basically rename the base name of the file to everything before that _R2. And then using that regular expression command, that'll actually that'll set the revision count to 2 and use that as a starting point for my check from there. If it doesn't find one of those at the end of the file name, then it sets it to 0. So then we do our check. If it starts with 0, we do, whether it starts with 0 or it starts with a higher number like 1 or 2 or whatever is tacked on here, then we need to do two different checks here for that first file, because the base file won't have that _R number after it. So what this will do is check if it's revision 0, it checks for just the file name and the extension. If it's a revision, then it checks for the file base name. It's past the file base name, uses the file base name and then the _revision and the extension. So that's how that works. It basically tacks on the revision number which would be 1, I think, for the starting one. If that file name is taken, it checks the file system to see if it exists. If it exists, then it increments the revision and it keeps running this loop over and over until it finds a free file name. If it gets to 99 for whatever reason, then I assume there's a problem in my logic. It just breaks and carries on with the workflow and overwrites revision 99 because we shouldn't be getting to that point anyway. So after it keeps basically loops through each of those files and checks to see whether that file name exists. Once it finds a good file name or it hits 99, it writes the file name into a variable, and it writes the output path into a variable, and it writes the revision number into a variable as well, and then prints a nice process log. So did I lose my file already? I guess those leave the log very quickly, but you can see from the logging if I run one of these again. She'll let this one run. I think I gotta run one more. I can see Fred's yelling at me. I've gone way over. I'm gonna finish 2 minutes and I'll be done.
Yeah, you're up to 12 on your Spinal
At
Tap
least
reference.
at least this one works. The one in
Yeah.
March did not work, so it was long and bad, but this one at least runs, so I'm happy with that. So I gotta run one more, I think, because I deleted that file there, so I can get a good example to show you. So we'll let this one go in, and after I'm done this explanation, we'll be good. Right, it might actually amuse you to know, I thought this one was gonna run under time for once. I was thinking, I don't think I'm gonna make it an hour.
I know you mentioned that. You got to stop worrying about that.
Hey, I tried to be economical. So you'll see here, if we actually look at the logging I put in here, because when I first developed this, we had a lot of issues with the code. So I put in a ton of logging in here to figure out what was going wrong in different cases. And it's actually cool, I kind of hijacked the set prem from RE here. So you can see it gets to that rule, then it starts the calculation. It starts with the base file name that was uploaded. So it checks to see if this path exists. And since that exists, it goes on and checks what about R1? And what about R2? And it kept on going until R5 was the first one it saw that didn't exist. So it made that the delivery path, set the revision to 5, gave me the actual variables in here I need to call in an output channel, and actually set them in the TWiST table as well, where I can call those in my transmit like I am. I did build two, and the very last thing I promise, Pinky Square, is maybe you don't want to call this in a set param like this. That's just one way where this actually returns in the set param, the file name itself, if you wanted to name that to a custom variable. If you don't want to go through all the rigmarole of setting up things, you could also do it direct in a program link. And I built one of those wrappers we were talking about earlier, the set ESFS suffix link. So basically what this does is if you call this with this different name, it calls the same procedure, but rather than returning the value, it returns 1 just so that it'll run in a program link. Because if you call the original procedure in a program link, it returns the name of the file with the revision. And if you try and run that in a link, it'll wind up aborting. So
All right.
run that one time and then we'll be done. If anyone has any questions, type them in now. If not, hold your
I
peace.
think
And
I think we covered the questions.
yeah, I think I scared
Yeah.
everyone away.
You only lost about 4, so not bad. Did want to say before everybody else drops off, next month's webinar should be a recap of the Euroduo event. If you don't have information on Euroduo, it is a hybrid event, so they're going to be doing it online like they've done the past couple of events. So if you'd like information on that, if you haven't signed up, let us know. Email us at tex@blancis.com, and we'll be happy to kind of forward you the invite for that and get you signed up for it. Other than that, if you have ideas for a future webinar, please let us know. We're always looking for stuff. It gets harder and harder sometimes to come up with things. We will be kind of revamping some of the old ones at some point as well. So thanks for your time. And Alex, I'll give you the final word and let you finish up.
Yep, well, I think that it did the same thing. We just ran it from a program link. Now, if you want to play with these workflows, as my closing note is when I post the video of this on YouTube and on our Zendesk, I'll actually put an attachment with all the workflows because I know some of the stuff like this is way too complex to dig into just watching me show it on a screen share. So I'll post copies of these workflows on our Zendesk that you can download and look through if you want to understand how specific code works. So hope you found it helpful. Sorry it was so long over time, but
Great. Thanks a lot for being so thorough, Alex.
no problem. Have a good one, everyone.